Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Hurricane Center Live. Glad to have you along. This is August the 5th, episode 145. This is the 2026 hurricane season. Glad to have you along. And Andrew Freeman is going to join us in just a couple of minutes from USAA. And USAA has been such an important part of what we do here at Hurricane Center Live for so long, and part of the National Tropical Weather Conference, the Storm Science Network, and everything we've been for the last several years. USAA, a big part of that. Looking forward to having Andrew on to talk about not just hurricanes, but everything else he's working on right now, because it's a busy season for him, even though for us in the Atlantic Basin, it's maybe not so busy, and hopefully it'll stay that way. Let's thank our sponsors, part of the program once again. Of course, first and foremost is USAA. Thank you, USAA, for all you do. Such an important part of getting the word out about hurricane resilience, hurricane preparedness, and things like that. We appreciate that. The South Padre Island Convention and Visitors Bureau, the host of the National Tropical Weather Conference every year. We'll be back there in April of 2027. We'll be at the Hilton Garden Inn this time. If you've been with us for a while, you've been there before, and it's a great facility, a great venue, so we're looking forward to being there. Live view, make sure our broadcast meteorologists can get a signal back to their home market so everybody can see what we're talking about, and the Texas Weather Network, all sponsors of the National Tropical Weather Conference. Okay, let's see who's hosting today. Bill Reed is here from the National Hurricane Center, former director. Bill, once again, we're discussing your backdrop there. I don't know if that's League City or not. It looks kind of like it, but no?
What? Yeah, the Chamber of Commerce would probably like me to say that.
Put a live League City kind of banner up behind you. That'd be all right.
Yeah, it's actually one of the one that come with the package with Zoom, and it just seems appropriate since we're talking tropics on this show.
It's perfect. Absolutely. Well,
Sure better than my cluttered office in the background.
You used to have your big hurricane flag back there behind you. That was really cool. But
yeah, I still have that. I'm getting ready to do a major overhaul of this office. It's only 8x10. It's a closet for all intents and purposes. And I've made a big mistake and got a bunch of furniture in here. I got to get rid of all that and go modern with it.
I have that problem here. We have guests coming in this weekend. I've got to scrunch everything back against the wall to make room for an extra bed in here, you know? I understand. I understand. Dr. Hal Needham, Hurricane Hal, joining us. And Hal, you've got a real background behind you, but you were actually on the beach in Galveston, right?
Yeah, I live here not far from the beach, but I'm doing this broadcast from home. Great to be back with you guys today.
Of course, Hurricane Hal with the podcast. We'll talk about the GeoTrek podcast in a little while. And Hal, I always failed to introduce you as the CNC disaster specialist. Give us that official title, just so those who are listening or watching know what it is.
Yeah, there you go. Official title, really Director of Extreme Weather and Disaster Science at GeoTrek. But the funding, you're right, comes from a parent organization called CNC Catastrophe and National Claims.
Terrific. Glad to have you guys with us once again, our eye wall of experts, we'll call it. And joining us today from, I think, San Antonio, USAA's Andrew Feemath. Andrew helps communicate disaster preparedness and recovery resources to homeowners across the country, USAA customers and clients. And Andrew, it's good to have you along. Thank you for your support of the National Tropical Weather Conference and of what we're doing here. And your focus this week is not so much hurricanes, is it?
Yeah, and Tim and team, really appreciate you all being here and having me. Just like you said, I mean, we're here to talk hurricanes, but unfortunately, you know, the weather doesn't stop throughout the country. And even for us, from a USA perspective, we have members who are spread across the entire world. So, you know, a couple of weeks ago, we were talking Guam. A couple of months ago, we were talking Guam after they saw 2 super typhoons hit them. But really, at the end of the day, it's one of those things where we know that we can't control the weather. But at the end of the day, there are some things that we can do to better prepare ourselves so that we can weather the storm, as they say. And hopefully we can dig into those things that the average homeowner can do to prepare themselves.
Well, give us just a little bit of background on you, your involvement here, your involvement with USAA, and the things that you do specifically for USAA.
Absolutely. So I'm approaching 15 years here at USAA, and I lead our catastrophe communications response. And so, you know, from that perspective, we have folks who, you know, are really just on the ground and who are spread throughout the entire country, responding in their own way. You know, from my perspective, it's less emphasis on the response over these more recent years, and it's trying to emphasize more on what are those preparation items. And so, you know, so we're not just on our back heels responding to the weather events. It's how do we connect with our members and how do we connect with the greater public on and just getting that important, helpful information to hopefully help them avoid those headaches. And so here live from San Antonio and happy to be here joined with you folks.
I've been in your building, of course, before, and it is a massive structure there in Northwest San Antonio. I was at a hotel in San Antonio a couple of weeks ago, and I could see the building. It's so far away, but yet it's massive. It's a major presence in the city, and it's great what you guys do.
It's incredible. More than 17,000 employees here at this one office. We have multiple gyms, cafeterias, multiple Starbucks here. So it's like its own little functioning city. And one interesting detail actually is, we have our own self-sufficient, kind of space where, God forbid there's a massive sort of catastrophe that just really wipes things out. We always say we will be, if not among, we will be the last insurance company standing to make sure that we can be there to support our members. And that comes directly influenced from our military legacy of always being ready and prepared.
Fantastic. Let me pass this over to Bill, because Bill, you've been a USAA member for a long, long time, and I know I've got a ton of questions. But let me let you take over as a USAA client and member and expert on this. Bill, take it away.
Yeah, well, yeah, I always look forward to getting a chance to talk one-on-one with folks from my insurance company. I've been a purchaser of insurance from USAA for 54 years now. Wow. Longer probably than most of the employees been alive.
We appreciate you, Bill.
Yeah.
Your picture's on the wall somewhere, I think.
Yeah. And the only claims I've had have been minor automobile fender bender kind of things. I've never had living on a coast my whole life. I still haven't had damage from a hurricane. So knock on wood. I thought maybe old Barrel there a couple of years ago might exert a little bit, but we have a good roof. No, not even a loose shingle on that. But
and so, Bill, not touched during Hurricane Harvey. You guys fared pretty well.
I've got pictures of the water that got on a porch. Another 2 inches deep, and we would have been yanking sheetrock. It would have gone over the edge of the slab.
Thank goodness.
But, which is truly amazing. I had 26 inches of rain in a 12-hour, actually it was more like a 10-hour period, 16 of it in a 3-hour period. It was the most incredible rainfall I've ever seen, and I was surprised. Probably I had some leakage, but it was around the exhaust vents on the roof. The rain was coming down so hard it couldn't run off the roof fast enough, and some of it leaked in there, but not enough to damage anything. You could just see the water spots up in the attic after that. In fact, in our neighborhood, there was a few people that got water in their garages, which sit a little lower than the slab. And I did a little survey of the 10 houses in my cul-de-sac and block, and I was the only one with flood insurance.
Of course.
We're not even in a 500-year flood elevation map of FEMA's, which is probably going to get changed in the next upgrade on that. I would think anywhere down here where your risk is at least that. With these kind of rains, it can happen. But the interesting thing, I know we always point out that it's hurricane season, time to review your insurance policy. It's just serendipity. Mine comes up for renewal the 1st of April. So that's when I look at it anyway, as a time of renewal. That's why that's the way I encourage people, is that gets you in your once a year thing. You get a reminder of how much more you're going to have to pay. Now you got to go in there and see what it is your coverage is and compare it to what you've learned about what you need. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's one of those things where, like, insurance isn't the most exciting topic, but it's important. When we think of our homes as being, probably the most valuable asset that we'll ever own, there's a reason why we insure it, and there's a reason why we pay our premiums, is so that if something does happen to it, we know that it's not going to just, financially, really alter our lives. And so the main point that we try to make for folks right now, particularly when it comes to hurricane season, and this is a message we've been sharing since April, since a conference, and really ramp it up through June. It's just, now is the time to take action. And the first thing that you can do is know what type of policy you have. This is different. You had mentioned on the auto side, the very key difference between homeowners insurance policy and auto is that from an auto perspective, it is generally a little bit more cookie cutter. you know what is covered. You're at fault for an accident, you have liability, you have damage, total your vehicle or repair it. When it comes to homeowners, there's a lot of little levers involved. And so you do have the ability to tweak that coverage specifically for yourself. So number one is you need to know what your policy covers. This isn't a situation where you're out at, the barbecue and the neighbors telling you what is covered and what isn't, and then, you take that as gospel. You need to, pull out your app for your insurance company, pull up those documents. Bill, you mentioned April 1st. That's when you get those documents, and then just see. And there are really three key things that you want to take a look at. Number one is the deductible. And you want to know, first and foremost, what your responsibility will be if a situation happens. And deductibles can be pretty significant. Gone are the days of just $1,000 deductible. Now you have percentages, and now sometimes you have folks that are pulling out, $10,000 that they're responsible for before the insurance kicks in. You need to know that so that you have your emergency fund. Number two is knowing your limits. And so we've seen, the price of homes and the value of homes go up pretty significantly in recent years since COVID. You want to make sure that your limits are where they need to be. And number three are the exclusions. And this is really where it'll vary from company to company, is knowing what is excluded. And that's really where the pedal hits the metal here is in knowing if something happens to me, I want to know, am I going to be on the hook for it? Or am I going to be able to work directly with my insurance company to come in and help out?
Wow. Are there relevant exclusions in the hurricane policies that are pretty much a standard thing when an insurance company is writing a policy that people might not be aware of that they should be?
Well, the biggest one that we spend most of our time talking about is going to be flood insurance. And so it's really whenever you have that flood damage, first and foremost, folks need to just remember that those are two separate policies. So you have your homeowner's policy, and that protects your structure, that's the hail damage, the trees that might come and fall on your home. And then you have your flood insurance. And flood insurance covers any water that essentially comes generally from outside the home. And so if we're thinking those surges that come with the hurricanes, or those creeks and those rivers start to overflow, if that water starts coming up, any associated damage from that typically requires a flood policy. Now, that's different, and where sometimes folks get a little confused is, like, for instance, a pipe burst in your home and floods out, your upstairs, your downstairs, floods your home. That is covered generally under your homeowner's policy. But there is that little nuance, and particularly when we talk about hurricanes and, the Atlantic and the tropics, some folks along the coast actually require three different types of coverages: your homeowners, your flood, and a wind policy. And so, it's not something that everybody's going to be well versed in. But at the end of the day, when you know that your biggest asset is vulnerable here, or your month-to-month budget could be impacted based on one of these different types of insurance coverages, it's something that we do need to spend some time and inform ourselves on.
Interesting. Do most of the insurance companies do like USAA, whereas I carry flood insurance, so every year when it's due for renewal, USAA actually sends me an email saying it's time to renew your flood insurance, and it lists what the new costs will be, and a real simple method to update it. Is that common amongst the industry, or is that something people need to be aware of?
Well, when it comes to flood insurance, obviously that is government backed. And so USAA will act as a broker. And, we're a little bit of a unique company in the sense of not only are we an insurance company, we're also a bank, life insurance, investments. And so our members have a tremendous amount of trust with us. I mean, this has been built over a century, and we have that military audience. And so, in our situation, we have that trust with our members where we do provide those reminders. We make sure that we have that constant communication. But what I'd say, Bill, like the big message on flood insurance and what is absolutely imperative here as I look, it's August the 5th, is that typically there's a 30-day waiting period for flood insurance. And so this isn't one of those situations where we hang out, we wait for the storm to start, swirling around and we're watching the Weather Channel. It's too late. At that point, you've unfortunately missed the ship there. Now is the time to act. And so now is the time to pick up the phone and just say, hey, I just want to get a quote. I want to make sure that if something happens, my life isn't going to be devastated financially by this. And knowing that there's that 30-day wait period, truly now is the time to take that action.
That's very important to know. With Harvey, I was surprised at the number of people that when Harvey fired up, the people that should have, I thought, known better were saying, I got to go get my flood insurance. And so good luck with that. It's not going to happen.
Fortunately.
Is it usually the same way with like windstorm? I would think insurers would be reluctant to write a windstorm policy with a Cat 4 aiming at the Gulf Coast somewhere.
Here's what I'd say, Bill, generally across the board, once a storm is imminent, at that point, across the entire industry, they're usually putting a freeze on obtaining new policies. And so when it comes to insurance, there's a certain level of predictability. You're pricing risk. So it's knowing, what has the potential to come, what is likely. And so, in that situation, if we were waiting for a huge influx of folks to kind of dive right in once the storm is imminent, at that point, that throws some uncertainty that could impact everybody's rates across the board and have more long-standing impacts. And so to your point, it's one of those things where whether it's a wind policy, a flood policy, or even a homeowner's policy. And what we tend to tell our folks, we'll have folks, for instance, we're talking about Harvey or some of these other storms where they were in the middle of selling their home and moving into a new home. And you do not want to get caught in a situation where you have a gap. And you might think, hey, it's only a day or two and nothing's going to happen. But imagine just the stars align in a negative way and a storm starts swirling around, a cap and a freeze gets put on by the industry for new policies. And suddenly you're kind of left in a tough situation. So if you're in that situation, you want to make sure that you're always covered. You have, even if it's a day overlap, you want to make sure that you're always covered so you don't get put in a tricky situation.
That's great. I could hog the whole show here, but I bet Hal's got some interesting questions. Hal?
Yeah, Andrew, you mentioned an enhanced focus on helping policyholders prepare for storms, whether it's hurricanes, wildfires, whatever. I'm curious, what are some of those preparations that homeowners can take?
So there are three key areas that we should put our immediate attention, whenever we're thinking about preparing. The first and foremost is the maintenance. So these are the things around the home. And one of the biggest ones that we see, Hal, is going to be the trees and the vegetation around our home. And so if we're talking to hurricanes, if we're talking, thunderstorms and hailstorms, you want to go outside and just take a look. Are there any trees that are hanging close to my home or any branches hanging over my home? You got to get rid of those, because as soon as the windstorms come, those are the first things that come down. And imagine at the thousands of claims that we experience every year based on trees or branches coming into homes that can then lead, once the rain comes in, some very significant damage through those holes in your roof. So number one is going to be the maintenance. And a couple more items on that, Hal, is going to be pulling out, the sealant and making sure that you don't have any of these areas that water can come through. When we're thinking this wind-driven rain, this is typically when you get the damage that you don't think of. When we're talking hurricanes, this is the water that over time can really seep into your home and can cause some significant damage that isn't always able to be seen. So, once a year, getting either yourself, if you're handy, or hiring just a handy person to come out and making sure everything is sealed up and that the roof is properly prepared and is up to date. So that's number one, is the prep. Number two, what we were already talking about, is going to be knowing what your policy covers. And so taking that time, and what we say is honestly just 15 minutes, pick up the phone, call your insurance company and say, hey, I just want to know what my policy covers. And that might be the easiest way, is what is my deductible? What are my limits? And what are some key exclusions on my policy based on where I live? And jot that down, absorb that, and see if there are any changes that you want to make. We typically tell our members to do what we call an insurance review. And it's helpful to get that information that I just mentioned, but also ask the question, are there any new discounts that might be available? Are there any actions that I can take to try and save some money on my policy? That's a good time to handle that conversation. And then number three is just having a plan. And so you've done the prep, you know what your policy covers. Now a storm starts swirling around. Now this is where you kick in your plan. Am I going to evacuate with my family? And if so, where am I going? So having that route down, whether you're going with family, knowing where you're going, and just keeping in mind that you got to consider your pets as well. You don't want them to be an afterthought, but having what you need so that you can quickly get out and be in a good spot. But on the other side, perhaps you're going to ride it out and you're not going anywhere. This is when we start talking about having your disaster readiness kit. And what we always tell our members is to be prepared for a minimum of 3 days without power and without water. Whatever you need for your family to sustain your household for 3 days, at a minimum, is what should be in your disaster readiness kit. And those are the 3 key areas that we would say how, from a preparation standpoint, we could put our immediate attention right now.
This is a great
Andrew,
conversation.
I
Let's
love
jump
those.
in. Let me jump in and take our mid-show break, Al. I'm sorry, we'll come back. We're flying. This is great stuff, but we do need to do this. First, we'll thank our sponsors, as we always do this time of the show: USAA, South Padre Island Convention and Visitors Bureau, Live View, and the Texas Weather Network. We appreciate all the sponsors who are part of this. And Bill, give us our quick tropical update, then we'll get back to Hal, because I know you have some more questions, Hal. So, Bill, what's going on in the tropics? Not much on our side. We know that.
All right, I'll do a quick run of there. There's the satellite view, and as you said, not much going on in the Atlantic right now, and the Hurricane Center definitely is copying that for the next 7 days in the Atlantic. Remember, folks, this is being recorded on Wednesday, August the 5th. Conditions certainly change as time goes on. The last few weeks, we've shown no lines on this, but you got to remember there's 1,000 iterations of the Google DeepMind model run in there, and there's maybe 10 lines on there. So there's extremely low probability, which I would call pretty close to none, that matches the forecasts that are out. The Climate Prediction Center that does the week 2 and 3 outlooks also shows very dry. The dark browns in there, we're really seeing what we should see in an El Nino year, even though we're coming into the ramp up to the peak of the hurricane season. And just in literally a minute ago is Phil Klotzbach's update from Colorado State. He made no changes from his July outlook for a total of 9, 4 hurricanes, 1 major in there. So that's where we sit on the tropics for now. I guess we'll flip it back to you, Tim.
Yeah, that's quick. That's great. It's just so quiet. Even the Central Pacific, there's stuff out there with nothing even worth chatting about. So thanks, Bill. Good job. And Hal, before you ask your next question, what's going on with GeoTrek?
Oh, so much. You know, we're launching a documentary series called Extreme Explorations. This is why I missed some episodes this year. We were filming episode number 1 in El Salvador, the 40th anniversary of their deadliest disaster, the big 1986 earthquake. And then last week I was out in Colorado. It was their 50th anniversary of the big Thompson River flood that killed 144 people, massive flood in 1976. That's Colorado's deadliest disaster. So we've been really making these into documentaries where we're learning a ton and really helping, basically paint the picture of what happened and talk about what professionals and local residents are doing to mitigate against disasters like this happening again.
Always fascinating programs, Hal. We appreciate that, and keep up the great work on that. Now go back before I so rudely interrupted you with your questions. I apologize. Jump back in.
No, thanks, Tim. It's always great to hear from our sponsors. You know, the show couldn't exist without some. So always a great show here. Yeah, Andrew, you had mentioned about these 3 key areas. You mentioned doing maintenance and checking in about your policy with questions to make sure you know what your coverage is. Are there discounts, things like that? How often do you recommend people check in? Like maybe once a year, or should they do it more frequently than that?
Yeah, generally we do say once a year at a minimum. And, as Bill was saying, whenever policy comes up for renewal, hey, that's kind of the light bulb to say, let me take a look and see if there's anything that I can do here. I think the other thing with that, Hal, in terms of the preparation, this goes beyond just the policy, but it's like documenting your home and taking an inventory. And this used to be a more tedious process where we used to provide, these sheets for folks to fill out with, what's in their home, but it's gotten much easier with our cell phones. And so what we would encourage folks to do is at least once a year, open up all the cabinets, in your home, and just stand in the middle and slowly take a video and record what's in your home. And do that in every room, upload it onto, the cloud, email it to yourself somewhere where you can have it handy. And this applies whether it's for insurance, whether, you're dealing with a hurricane, or unfortunately, as we were saying, there's wildfires, throughout the West right now. But if God forbid you're dealing with the total loss, the last thing you want to do is just be dealing with nickel and diming and trying to remember everything that was in your home. That's one of those other simple actions that you can take now once a year so that you can be prepared.
Yeah, Andrew, I was actually just going to ask you this question about doing the, video of your home. And a question I have, let's say someone, they tricked out their man cave with all this new technology, or they build an addition. Should they take extra steps also to make sure they have like digital backups of purchases within the last year, or things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. Let's say you've made a big investment, whether it's on the home, on the structure, on the property, or just the objects within your home. If you've made a significant investment in that, you should absolutely pick up the phone, call your insurance company, and just be like, "Hey, I did this." And the fear here is like, "Oh, they're gonna raise my rates." You would be surprised at how minimal of a change this often is in the grand scheme of things. And so perhaps it could be an amendment on your homeowner's policy to account for the shed, the porch, whatever those additions are. You had mentioned man cave. Let's say you invested in, maybe you got a gaming system and you got some pretty cool electronics there. A VPP, a valuable personal property policy, is huge. And typically those costs, like, they can cost anywhere from 10 to 20 bucks. Like the cost of a pizza is what we usually say. And they can be very minimal. And often those can even provide more expensive coverage for things like if you have jewelry, firearms, memorabilia, other items that, in full transparency, typically are not covered under your policy. Those are the conversations to have, and you would be surprised at how reasonable those types of more novel policies can be. But it's worthy of a conversation, to your point.
Yeah, great insights, Andrew. And the last question I have for you, I know you often will go to disasters, whether it's a hurricane zone, wildfire zone. What do you personally do when you're there? I mean, how are you helping support the policyholders when you're out there on the ground?
Absolutely. So it's really twofold. In the pre-work, it's conversation that we're having, preparing. We do that from afar. Once there's an actual event, like let's say a hurricane, we deploy on the ground. And really the importance here is just to ensure that we're getting the proper information out to the folks on the ground. There might be a little bit of a difficulty in maintaining connectivity if folks are outside of their home. What we do from a USAA perspective is we set up our catastrophe operations right there in ground zero, so to speak, somewhere safe where our members can come, to our big RV, and they can handle everything from their claim, filing their claim, getting their checks directly deposited, or we can just give them the space to be able to hop on into some air conditioning on a computer, pay their other bills that perhaps they haven't been able to, or provide any additional support that we can. From a communications perspective, this is typically where I'm going to be interacting with local and national media on the ground. And our big message for the most part is twofold. Number one, how to follow your claim. And really our point here is just get back on your feet as soon as possible. Our purpose is we want our members to file the claim, be at the front of the list, because you'd be surprised how those contractors get pretty busy pretty quickly, where sometimes there's 2, 3, 4 month delays. We want our members at the front so that they can get back on their feet and rebuild as quickly as possible. But the second one is a message that we hammer home, especially on the ground. It's being aware of fraudulent contractors. And so unfortunately, just as we see all the help and the resources coming in after these devastating events, the linemen coming in and Team Rubicon and those resources, fraudulent contractors come in as well. And so the message that we share with folks is if someone comes to your door and they say that they're going to fix your roof and do everything, and they're asking for money up front before they start any work, red flag. If they provide you an estimate that looks, maybe it's a little too high or maybe it's a little too low, typically a red flag. And so if it sounds too good to be true, it usually is. And what we tell our members is just to rely on the agencies that are out there, whether it's the Better Business Bureau, whether it's your insurance company, just saying, hey, I got this business card. Are they a part of our network? Are they a reputable company? And so it's not being pressured in those moments when you're in these high stress situations to make these very impactful decisions. It's let me get the information. I'm going to take a deep breath. I'm going to hit pause. I will get back in contact with you tomorrow if it's something I'm interested in. And then you go back and you do your research to make sure that you don't get into one of these very difficult situations. Unfortunately, that's the message that we have to hammer home often after these catastrophes.
Andrew, I really like what you said there about the fraudulent claims. I've heard so many cases where someone's knocking on someone's door and saying, hey, I have a long waiting list. If you don't want to sign up right now, I'll go to someone else. And people panic. They say, well, I don't want to wait months. And all of a sudden they're handing over cash or signing papers. Great advice there.
Thank you.
Tim and Bill, I'll pass it back to you.
I'll add to that. Another thing I've noticed with those is they'll come up after Beryl. I had a couple come, two guys come to the door wanting to replace my damaged roof. It was a brand new fortified roof. There wasn't even a loose shingle. They said they would file all the insurance papers for you, which is, I think, a crock. And then, so to get rid of them, I basically said, do you mind if I take your picture? They're gone. If it's I do that with all solicitations anymore. If I think they're a fraud, I'll report them so someone can run them down. We're not supposed to get those in our neighborhood, but if they're legit, they won't mind.
Sure. Maybe I need to add that to my tips, Bill. I appreciate that.
That's a great idea. 30 minutes go so fast, guys. Gosh, what a fascinating conversation. And Andrew, just great information. We appreciate that. I'm adding a lot of the stuff to the slideshow I do for hurricane prep. So we really appreciate your information today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure, y'all.
Hal, what did we learn today?
I mean, so much. I love just the practical step-by-step items that Andrew's giving, not only for USAA policyholders, but really for anyone thinking about insurance. I think this is going to be a very popular episode with our audience.
Terrific. And Bill, what's your takeaway?
Well, yeah, it's a complicated business, and I think especially for a homeowner, we only deal with it at most once a year or when we have a claim. So we're not that knowledgeable on it. And that's why it's important to establish that relationship with your insurance agent or company beforehand, so that when the event comes, like Andrew said, and you're all stressed out, there's someone you can go to that'll walk you through it.
I love that. Establishing relationships is so important. Pick up the phone and call. They're more often than not somebody you can talk to pretty much anytime you need to. All right, guys, great program today. We appreciate it. Andrew, thank you. Hal, Bill, great job today. Alex back in control room. Thank you for what you do. Let's thank our sponsors once again, USAA, the South Padre Island Convention and Visitors Bureau, LiveView, and the Texas Weather Network. Next week, the incomparable Jeff Lindner will be with us. We're going to talk about Harris County flood control, and he's a star amongst stars in Houston, and we appreciate all Jeff does as well. So that'll be next week. We invite you to join us for that. That wraps up episode 145 of Hurricane Center Live. We'll see you next time. Have a great week. And by the way, happy early birthday, Bill. See you.
Thank you.